again, Instagram just is not cooperating today and letting me, it's not letting me invite Kristin Koval, my guest author today, to join me. So she's going to ask to join me, and let's see if that will let me bring her in. Nope, you're watching, Kristin. Now you got to ask to join. There we go. I'm going to accept it, see if that works. Okay, it thinks that I accepted your request. Okay, but I'm not seeing you. That's the problem. It says you've joined, but I don't see you. Okay. Now I've invited you. Let's see if that will. There you are. Yay.
All right. That took a few tries, but we got it.
We got it. The technology, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you? It's snowing here.
Is it really?
It is, yes.
Let's see, you're in Boulder?
I'm in Boulder, yeah. And we desperately need the moisture, but I think this is just kind of a small, pretty April snow and not going to be the actual moisture we need.
Maybe it won't stick.
I don't care what it does, to be honest, as long as we get moisture, because we're in such bad drought conditions.
I just angled this over so you can see the sun coming in my...
Aren't you lucky?
Hey, it's supposed to rain this weekend, and we'll take it, you know? So listen, I had introduced you. Let me do it again for the benefit of the folks that are going to join us or watch this later so that everybody knows what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about penitence. Such a beautiful cover, and I'm sorry it's backwards, but Instagram does that, you know? Just a gorgeous cover. Is this from a painting? Oh, can't hear you now.
All right, now am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Okay. Perfect.
I tried to put on Do Not Disturb on my phone, and I think that's what caused it. So hopefully nobody calls while we're talking. Yeah, it's a great story, actually. So my publisher, the amazing 𝐊𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐷𝘦, asked if I had any ideas for the cover, and I didn't know exactly, but I knew that most people wouldn't know what Southwest Colorado looks like. So I sent a lot of photos of Southwest Colorado, and I love photography. I think in another life I would have been a photographer, and so I had a lot of photos, sort of landscape photos, and in one in particular was of just aspen trees, and I sent that to them. And one of the, and they went to work on all of the different ideas that they had. And they came back with this, this is one of the beautiful options. And we were pretty much all instantly in love with this cover and decided to go with it. Well, come to find out a little while later that the artist who painted this painting in a country of 330 million people, if that's where our population is today, lives 10 minutes down the road from me.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really small world.
Wow. Well, it's gorgeous. So if you see her, you know, tell her that I've heard other people talking about how beautiful it is too. So it's very well received. And you know, before I forget, thank you to 𝐊𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐷𝘦, right? Because they're the ones that invited me last year to participate in a read along and sent me the book, and I'm so glad that they did. You know, they're really good about things like that. They reach out every now and then to send books for us to read and to drop in little free libraries, and they're really an exceptional publisher that way. So
they are. I'm so lucky that I landed with them.
Yeah, shout out to them. So let me tell everybody a little bit about your background that I got from my internet sleuthing.
Okay.
What I discovered is that you are a recovering attorney.
That's right.
Which is what we say when people leave the profession, but they're not necessarily done working yet, as opposed to me, I'm a retired attorney. So,
Yes.
I'm not working anywhere. But, and you had always wanted to be a writer.
Yes.
And you went to, I think it was Georgetown and majored in English.
Correct.
Columbia School of Law.
Yes.
Boy, not too shoddy on the institutions you picked there.
I got lucky.
Very good schools. And then this one made my eyes pop out of my head. You were a corporate attorney.
I was.
Ugh.
A lot of people assume I must have been a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor or somehow involved with criminal law, but that was not actually my area of expertise. I started out as a corporate attorney and eventually transitioned into trust and estates, but that's still more on the commercial side than anything else. But trust and estates was at least a little bit more people oriented. I got to work with clients instead of corporations, which I enjoyed.
And did you litigate at all?
I never litigated.
Okay, so you never did trials and all that stuff.
No, and when it came time to write this book, I had a lot of research to do because I had been in a courtroom exactly twice, both
Wow.
times for jury duty. So never actually as an attorney, and so I had to. I did a fair amount of research in terms of reading, but I actually went and watched trials as well.
Well, two things that people watching can take away from this chat right off the bat. Number one, you don't have to be a litigator and you can still have a great career as an attorney. You don't ever have to go to court if you don't want to.
That's right. That's right.
You can find ways. And number two, law is very, very specialized.
Yes.
And like I had to go downtown last year and see an attorney to have my estate plan updated. And people look at me like, but you're a lawyer. I'm like, but I don't know anything about drafting wills or trusts. I just learned enough to pass the bar. You have to take the class in school. And then I went out and did other stuff. And like you, I never practiced criminal law.
Yeah. What did you do?
Civil rights and employment law.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah. And I spent the last 14 years of my career with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, but I was not doing criminal law. I was dealing with employees, not inmates. Although I certainly interacted with inmates because I had to go to prison a lot. But anyway, so you decided about 7 or 8 years ago, I think it was, I'm done. I'm hanging it up. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to write. And you had tried to write a couple of times before. I saw an interview where you said something about you thought you were going to be a new mom and write a book. And I laughed because, of course, sure, we all think we're going to have all this time while we bring the baby home and they're just going to sleep. Sure.
Yeah, so basically, a lot of people think, oh, you kind of just spit this book out as your first book and it did so well. But the reality is I actually tried to write a book 3 other times before I wrote this one. And you're correct. The first time I ever tried was when I was a new mom. And yes, I thought I would write an entire book. And as it turned out, I couldn't even find the time to take a shower. So no book got written then. Second time was when the kids were in elementary school. And I was showering by then, but
Yeah.
I kind of quickly realized I didn't really have it in me to be a full-time mother, a full-time lawyer, and a writer. And I know some people do, but I couldn't. I just couldn't make that work. And so I kind of set it aside until the kids were in high school, tried for a third time. I was still kind of floundering around. And one day I happened into a free writing class in Boulder. And it was a Saturday morning. I remember it was in the spring and, we sat outside and I sat through this class and I left and I realized that the reason I had been failing and struggling and floundering was that I hadn't ever taken a creative writing class in my entire life. And I hadn't ever kind of belonged to or joined any kind of writing community. And so I set about changing both of those things. I started to take the creative writing classes and really learn how to write. And in doing so, I started to meet other writers and joined a writing group and just kind of slowly earned my way into a writing community finally.
You got through an English major and never had to take creative writing?
Yeah, I don't know how I did that, but I never I should go back and look at my Georgetown transcript just to make sense, to make sure of it, but I don't think I did.
Huh.
I had a pretty high, specialized major because I was in a special program that was going to allow me to get um a master's in 4 years of undergrad plus just 1 year following that, instead of, I think normally it would take 2 years following undergrad. And so I was taking a lot of classes that were in my area of Dante and T.S. Eliot and things like that. So yeah, so I never really got the chance to take a creative writing class.
It's interesting. I would have just assumed that was somewhere in there because, you know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your inspiration for this book, because I think it's a fascinating experience that you had that brought you then to this story, and I want other readers to hear it.
Yeah, people ask that question a lot, and it's actually kind of a twofold inspiration. The first was actually a desire to write about forgiveness because I had a very personal and positive experience with forgiveness in my own life, where somebody I had been trying to forgive for a long time. I forgave them one day out of nowhere. As I was driving, I was thinking about them. They kind of, the whole thing of not being able to forgive them crossed my mind, and I all of a sudden felt this sense of peace and knew that out of nowhere I had forgiven them. And I realized, and it took me a long time to realize this because I think some people learn this much earlier in life than I did, that when you forgive another person, you're not doing something for that other person. And you are not, although the word makes you think that you're giving them a gift, you are actually giving yourself a gift by letting go of the anger that you've been carrying around. So this was an experience that really changed my life for the better. And I knew that I wanted to write about forgiveness in some way, shape, or form. But at the time, I didn't know how to do it because you could very easily concoct a story that would sound preachy and moralizing. And I didn't want to do something like that. So I kind of set aside that desire for a little while. And a couple of years later, I came across a story of juvenile fratricide, one young sibling killing the other young sibling. And I was really struck by the news story. And I started doing some research into how common juvenile fratricide was. And I found so many more cases than I ever anticipated very quickly. And I realized as I was looking at all of those cases that what I was most interested in was not actually the salacious details of the crime, but instead the parents, because I really felt for the parents. And I realized that this would actually be a good starting point and a good way for me to write about forgiveness. If I set a story on the immediate aftermath of a juvenile fratricide, it would put the parents into the very hardest possible position to forgive and the very easiest possible position to forgive. Hardest because if you look at it, one child kills the other. How do you forgive that? But easiest because if you don't forgive that child that did the killing, you will have lost both children. And it gave me a chance to actually explore this idea of forgiveness and how challenging yet how rewarding it can actually be.
And you created characters here with so much depth and so many layers. It's just really a brilliant book. I just don't know how else to say it. I mean, the way that you dug into these people and their psyches. I do have a couple of questions about your writing process. The one everybody wants to know. Are you a pantser or are you a plotter? You know, that's the question. If I don't ask, I'm going to get messages. Why didn't you ask me that?
I actually love that question, and I taught a whole class on it,
Oh,
actually.
did you?
I did, because I am neither. Um, I have a difficult time plotting, and I, made my way through high school, college, and law school without ever really doing any outlining for my classes, and because my brain just can't do work that way. But I am also not really a pantser because I kind of need some direction. And I realized that what I actually am is a diagram drawer.
Oh,
And I kind of brought this habit over from being a trust and estates attorney, because as a trust and estate attorney, you frequently will, you draw a diagram with,
right.
you know, you at the top, and what happens if you die, what happens if both you and your spouse die,
Yeah.
and how the money passes to children or to a niece or to a nephew or to charity, and all the different ways it's interlinked. And that was actually how I figured out how to write Penitence, was by drawing a diagram of what my characters would look like and how they were related to each other. And, it helped me figure out what their past was and what their present was.
That's interesting because I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but as I was reading the book, this is my scribbles where I listed the characters and details about them, made notes, and then
Oh,
drew lines. So isn't that funny? But, I never did that kind of lot, but that's how I was putting this book together in my head, because when I first started out, I wanted to make sure I had all the relationships. So same idea. But then did you write, because your chapters are not all in the same time period, because you jump back to tell the backstory. So did you write the book like chapter 1 through however many, or did you take them apart and, write the backstory and then break that up and insert it somehow? Or what was that process like?
believe it or not, I wrote the chapters in the order they appear. I don't know
Okay.
why. It just kind of made sense to me. I would sort of write what was happening in the present and then realize I'm going to need to explain X, Y, and Z. And so then I would stop and kind of gather myself in the past and try to figure that out. But interestingly, my second novel has a little bit of that back and forth, although not structured in the same way. And I'm having an easier time separating it out and writing all of the past and then all of the present.
Okay.
So maybe
And
it
then
depends
you'll
on the book you're writing.
try to fit them together at
Yeah.
places. Yeah. Um, why did you have what we would think of as the current day story set in, it starts in 2016. Was there a specific reason for it being that year as opposed to like 23 for whenever you were writing?
Well, I did not. First of all, I was writing this at the very beginning of the pandemic when
Mm.
we didn't know what was going to happen. And so I did not want to write in 2019, 2020, because I actually did not want to incorporate the pandemic into this story. So I knew it would be sometime prior to that. I really wanted the focus to be just on this novel.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
then as I started to think about the role that technology might have played in people's lives in terms of cell phones and things like that, and also the changes that were happening within the criminal justice system, I realized that for what Julian was doing as a criminal defense attorney in New York City in the 90s and early 2000s, and eventually where he would have been in his career when this happened, that was the right time frame.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked that because, I always wonder why writers pick certain time periods. And I don't know anything about criminal law either, and certainly not in New York. So that's a helpful explanation. Thank
Yeah.
you. So let's talk a little bit about these characters because, boy, are they a fascinating bunch. really, I mean, you came up with some real interesting folks here. Um, you really have, now this is the way I see it, and everybody, of course, that reads a book reads a different book, right? You
Hmm.
got three mothers here in this story. And I kind of see Angie, and we're not going to do spoilers because the whole point here is I want people to go buy this book and read it, right? So we're not going to tell them the whole story because what would be the point? But I see Angie as kind of at the center of the story, and the other people are kind of revolving around her in a way. But you've got three very different mothers, and they're all fascinating. You've got Angie with her struggles, of course. Then you have her own mother, Livia, who has Alzheimer's, and she's a tough mother.
Yes.
Boy, I'm probably not the only reader that saw some of their own mother in there. You know, maybe not to that degree, but maybe something about that generation, you know, because they had survived so much. There's a point at which Livia kind of gets frustrated with Angie and basically says, you know, buck up, you know, let's get busy, suck it up, let's go.
Yeah.
And that I was like, oh God, I hear my mother's voice. And then you have Martine, who's contemplating retirement, a lawyer who's 72 years old, and she doesn't know anything about trying to defend a 13-year-old who has murdered her brother. And it's not a spoiler to say, everybody knows, you know, from the synopsis in the first chapter, that's what happens, is Nora's
Yeah. That's not
13,
a spoiler.
and she shoots her brother Nico, who's 14, and kills him. And that's where the story begins. And so when you were writing these three women, did you set out deliberately to have these contrasts to help with your themes, or did they just sort of evolve? Because I hear writers say, I don't know, it just came to me. I sat down and there she was. She was talking to me.
They just sort of evolved that way. I started out really having a very clear picture of who and what I wanted Martine to be.
Mhm.
And in some ways, she's my beating heart of the story because I'm a former lawyer.
Yep.
And I just loved that she was this strong woman, because if she's 72 in this timeline in 2016, it means that she was a lawyer when there weren't very many female lawyers, and she was doing it in a rural part of Colorado. And I just wanted her to be that amazing, strong person.
Right.
I wanted her to have had a prior relationship with Livia, Angie's mother, because they both would have been working mothers at a time when most women weren't necessarily working. Um, but I didn't want Livia to be the same character as Martine. And Livia just kind of burst out that way, and I'm not really sure why. But I didn't want her to be a perfect mother, because all of these characters needed to spend some time um, thinking about who they needed to forgive in their own lives. And
Right.
so I wanted this to be something that Angie had to think about. And then Angie, Angie kind of developed more slowly. I did, want to make sure that the parents did not both arrive at forgiveness at exactly the same time immediately after the murder took place, because forgiveness is actually hard. It's challenging. You have to work
Mhm.
at it. Sometimes
Mhm.
it comes to you right away. But not always. I mean, I think most of the time we as human beings, we feel anger when we're wronged or when something bad happens. And so I think it's unusual when forgiveness arrives immediately. And so that was one of the reasons I didn't have Angie be a human being who forgave immediately, because to me that did not seem like it would have been normal.
Well, and Angie's a tough character in the sense that your heart goes out to her, because if you're a mother or a parent, you, this is unimaginable, you
Yeah.
know, that you as you're reading, you just think, how would anybody survive this? Having these two children that you love so much, more than your life, and one kills. I mean, how would you go about forgiving that child? I mean, I can't even put
Yeah.
myself, you know, in that spot. Um, but on the other hand, she's done a lot of things to bring her to this point too, that there's a cause and effect kind of calculation as a reader that you're doing in your head along with her, because she's naturally questioning choices that she's made.
Yeah.
And how, and without giving anything away. We all do that. We question choices as we go through life, some bigger than other choices. And she's really having a crisis, I think, of her own life. And as a mother, you know, obviously the sense of failure that is palpable that she talks about. And that's another question I had for you. You wrote this from like a third person narrative, like from a distance.
Yeah.
And I was wondering last night why you didn't have any of these characters relating this in their own, like a first person narrative. Was that a conscious choice, or is that just how you started writing and stayed with it, or how'd that come about?
No, it was very deliberate. So I liked the idea of third person, but it's a close third person for Angie, Martine, and Julian. So I hope when readers are reading their points of view that they feel very close to those characters and that they feel like they're in their heads. But I didn't want it to be a first person, because that it to me it feels very difficult to flip between multiple first person narrators, and it's easier to flip between third person narrators.
Mm-hmm.
Nora, the 13-year-old who committed the crime, was a different story. I started to write her chapters in that same close third person, and I very quickly realized I wasn't getting the voice right, partly because maybe I'm not 13, and partly because I think mental illness is really challenging to understand from a 13-year-old's point of view. And I did a lot of research on it. I read the DSM-4 manual, which is the manual that psychiatrists use. And mental illness among that age group is not very well understood. And I realized that if experts don't understand potential mental illnesses in a 13-year-old, then I shouldn't expect myself to. And so I stepped back and told her chapters actually from an omniscient point of view.
Yeah.
And that worked a lot better. And it also gave me an opportunity to highlight some of the injustices that you might see in the criminal justice system for juveniles that Nora, as a 13-year-old, might not be able to notice,
Right.
because she's 13 and too young to pay attention to that sort of thing.
Right. Plus her attorney Julian becomes her attorney.
Yeah.
Assisted by Martine.
Yes.
And he has experience with these kinds of cases that Martine doesn't have. And so you have some things that I think are very helpful to the reader, where he's telling her why he's talking to Nora in a certain way, which also educates us.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful.
And it's funny because omniscient narrators are really uncommon in modern literature. And I was actually terrified when I started writing her chapters with an omniscient voice. But I think it ended up working out a lot better that way. And I'm really glad that I kind of bit the bullet and did the hard thing, the scary thing on that.
Oh, yeah. And it's, I mean, the narrative it's flawless. It just flows from one perspective to the other and from one timeline to the other. So there's not any of this, you know, like sometimes you're reading a book and you feel like you got jerked in another direction if it's not executed well. And that's not the case here at all. It's a very smooth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these women, they're all grappling with forgiveness in their own way.
Yeah.
And then we have David, who's Nora's husband.
Angie's husband.
I'm sorry, Angie's husband.
Yeah.
And he's grappling in his way. But like you said, his process is very different than Angie's.
Yeah.
Very different. And Julian, of course, is, I don't want to give too much away, but he's sort of haunted. He's a man who has something in the past. He's got a secret. he has not shared that with anybody except one person in the world, and he's carried it for years. And so all of these characters have things that they've regretted, choices they've made that they're questioning. They're all in a position of trying to forgive themselves, trying to forgive somebody else, and all the time this crisis that they're navigating, or most of them are navigating. Livia, of course, doesn't realize what's going on.
Right.
That's a lot to take on as a debut novelist. And you did it.
Well, I tried. The epitaph that I used for this novel was a Bryan Stevenson quote. He's the guy that wrote Just Mercy. And I love that book, and he's just a brilliant person.
Yes.
And the quote is, "Each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done." And I'm a really strong believer in the fact that we all have a worst thing. And our worst thing might not be murdering our sibling, but we all have a worst thing, something we've done in our lives that we're deeply ashamed of. And we did it when we were 15 or 29 or 46, who knows when we did it. But we have that worst thing. And so I deliberately wrote each of the characters to be flawed human beings, because I wanted the reader to see a worst thing in each of the characters, and hopefully think about the fact that they, as a reader, in their own real lives, have a worst thing, because hopefully it helps prompt the idea of empathy for the characters. And if you know that you have a worst thing, you hope that people will exhibit empathy for you. And if you want people to exhibit empathy for you, then you hope that, or you might be able to learn that you should exhibit empathy for others. And if you can find empathy for other people, you will eventually land on mercy. And if you find mercy for another person, then hopefully eventually you can also land on forgiveness. So that was the reason that I designed all of the characters in a flawed manner.
Well, it's very effective. And there's parts of each character that I think every reader can relate to in some way.
Good.
Because everybody's got their own struggles, like these folks do.
Yeah.
And this idea of penitence. Julian in particular is trying to do penance for his past by helping clients. He's a dedicated attorney, and he takes on a specific kind of case, and he's very passionate about the legal system and about who deserves justice and how justice should be meted out. And you have some very strong opinions that he voices, which stand in contrast, of course, to how the system really works.
Yes.
Which I thought was a very clever and very effective way of doing that. But they're all kind of doing penance in their own way.
Yeah.
And tell me about why you picked that title. It's got numerous meanings.
That was why I chose it as a title. If you look at the root, and I have actually a funny story about the title that I'll get to in a little minute, in a little bit. But if you look at the sort of the root of penitence, it's the Greek and Latin penitere. And that word has spawned a number, the Greek, the Latin root has spawned a number of words that we find in modern English. It's spawned penitence. It has spawned the word penance, which is the sort of punishment that you might have after you've done something wrong. Penitentiary, which is where we send people to punish them. Repent, which is what you do to try to make up for what you did wrong. And I love that all of these related words and meanings are caught up in the title penitence. And so that was really why I chose it.
Yeah.
And I never really had a different title for it. And my fun story for the title is that when I was querying for agents, at one point I spoke with an agent who said, well, I really like the novel, but you're 100% going to have to change the title. I don't like the title at all.
Oh,
And
wow.
I didn't end up signing with that agent. But after Celadon bought the book, I was talking to my editor and I remembered that conversation. And I said, do I need to change the title? And she said, absolutely not. The title, Penitence, is the whole reason I picked up your novel out of my pile of novels to read the day that I did. She said, I love the title. We would never change it. Which just
Wow.
goes to show you how subjective reading can be,
Right.
um, which is it's fascinating.
Well, and also how publishing or reaching any goal has a bit of magic to it.
Yeah,
Like
for
that book
sure.
was supposed to be in her hands with that title, and it was all supposed to come together the way it did.
Yeah, which is, I don't know. It's very interesting that it all worked out that way.
It sure is. Um, you also explore something in the book about being a daughter. In addition, they're the three mothers and the way they mother and their relationships with their children, all of which is, we could go do an hour about that, which we won't. But there's also the idea of being a daughter.
Hmm.
Um, and as between Livia and Angie,
Right.
I thought that was very interesting because even though they've had all of these problems, Angie still feels very obligated and very dedicated to making sure she's taking care of her mother. But there comes one point when she has to make a decision, and I'm just wondering why you chose to take the story where you did, because it had to do with end of life decision making and advanced Alzheimer's and whether or not to insert a feeding tube, which is a
Right.
subject that's near and dear to my heart because of my legal background. I'm just wondering how you arrived at. I mean, it's a minor theme, but it's one that is worthy of consideration.
Well, as a trust and estates lawyer, I had to advise my clients to think about that very issue.
Right?
Um, and yet, I think so few people actually do think about it. Some people do, but not all of them. And a great many don't ever speak to their family members about it. And it really leaves the family members in a rough spot because they don't know what to do and they feel so much guilt about every decision that they're going to make. Um, and I kind of wanted to highlight that Livia left Angie in that tough situation of not knowing what to do. And
Right.
Angie, because she didn't know what to do, maybe made a choice that her mother wouldn't have wanted, but there was no way for her to know that.
Right. But she did make a choice that she felt was based on her mother's overall personality and values.
Yes, yeah. I tried to
But,
have her do it in a logical way, but I don't know that any of us would have wanted that, and it's such
well,
it's such a hard situation.
well, that's the case I litigated to the Supreme Court in California. It was the feeding tube case. So that's why that one
Oh,
really, yeah, the conservatorship of Wendland was my case, 6 years.
oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
so
debating about pulling out this man's feeding tube. And of course, no advance directive and
yeah,
different opinions within the family. So that's why that story kind of jumped out at me. And I think it's worth anybody that's watching this and is going to read the book. I'd like them to be on the lookout for that and think about that and then go talk to their family about it.
yes, yes,
Right?
exactly. Yeah,
Because, as an estate and wills attorney, the best thing you can do is put it all down in writing.
yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So that's a message that we want people to get.
Yes,
Don't leave people standing in the hospital hallway wondering what to do.
yes. It's a painful
Um,
conversation, and when you're, a lot of families don't live near each other, and so if they're seeing each other on a vacation, sitting down to talk about an issue like that isn't necessarily a first choice, but you have to.
yeah, you absolutely do, to save your family the kind of war that was going on in my case. 6 years of unbelievable stuff. Anyway, all right, so let's go back to the themes that we have in the book: guilt, remorse, um, the idea of penance and atonement, and how do you make up for what you've done, forgiving yourself, forgiving other people, this end of life decision making that we talked about, and the legal system, which is really almost a character in the book, because we see Nora in a juvenile, like a detention facility, awaiting trial, and we are introduced to some of her cellmates, and that's a whole education for this girl. She's 13 years old and she has no prior criminal uh, convictions, or she's never been arrested, she's never been in trouble, and oh my gosh, now she's got to survive in this place. And that was interesting to read about too. I thought that you did a really good job of describing what it was like, and the other roommates and cellmates, and the whole challenge that she's looking at, because I don't think it's a spoiler to say that if you have, deliberately shot and killed your brother, you're probably not going to be released anytime soon.
No, I don't think that's a spoiler. And yet I do sometimes have people say, she's so young, why did she, why did she end up in this juvenile detention center? And the reality is, you know, most of the time, ages 10 and up, if you've committed a crime, you're going to have to answer for what you've done. There are consequences.
Right.
And the very hard thing is that many very young people who have committed serious crimes actually end up in the adult criminal justice system. They might be housed, they might still be housed, they would still be housed most of the time in a juvenile detention center, or some sort of center for youth. Although if there's not space, some juveniles do end up in adult systems and they have to be placed in solitary until they turn 18. So all around, it's a pretty terrible situation. One question I frequently get from people is, it's not, or a statement, sometimes people will say it's not realistic that she would be charged as an adult. And
Oh,
unfortunately,
yeah.
it's very realistic.
Mhm.
And I thought that by making her 13, that there was a chance she would remain in the juvenile system. And that was partly why I made her 13 when I was figuring the novel out. And I spent a lot of time with two criminal defense attorneys who specialize in juvenile defense. And they both said to me, in the state of Colorado, there is not a single prosecutor who would let Nora stay in the juvenile system. They would all charge her as an adult. And just for background for anybody that's watching this, criminal law varies from state to state because it's governed by state law, not federal law.
Right.
And the way that different states deal with this particular issue is that if a child that's 13 commits a murder, there are some states that would require prosecutors charge her as an adult. New York is one of those states. I'm pretty sure California is as well.
Yeah.
Some states provide what's called prosecutorial discretion, which means that the prosecutor has the discretion to do what they think is best.
Mhm.
And in practice, that means that they will charge that child as an adult. And there are some states kind of who are a little bit further into reforms based on the lack of development of a brain for somebody that age. There's a lot of scientific work that's been done that has shown that, when you're 13, your brain is so undeveloped that you really can't be held to an adult standard. There are some states that say, no, you can't charge a 13-year-old as an adult.
Mm. Well, and I thought you did an excellent job too of laying out the alternatives as they're going through the legal process. And Julian is, explaining to Nora and her parents, these are your options. This is how this could go. And the number of years she's looking at being incarcerated.
Yeah.
It's kind of a horrifying thought. And it's really parents. That's why this book is so heartbreaking and stays with readers. I think it's parents losing 2 children.
Yeah.
Because Nora's lost in many ways, no matter what they do. Now, you have a mystery in this book. Like, you don't have enough in there? You have a mystery. It's not a whodunit. We know who did it.
Yeah.
The question is, why?
Right.
Now, I heard somebody say they thought that it was an ambiguous ending. And I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. I didn't think it was ambiguous at all. I thought it was pretty clear why she did it. But I guess that, again, 2 people don't read the same book. So that could be debated.
I think it can be debated. And I wanted it to be somewhat debatable because, number one, I think that readers are very smart and they like to have something to chew on when they're done reading a book. I think most people, I get if you're, reading a summer beach read romance, you definitely want to see that happy ending.
Yeah.
But this is not a happy ending kind of book. And so I wanted readers to be able to keep thinking when they were done so that they would keep thinking also about the idea of forgiveness.
Right.
So I didn't want to wrap everything up with a bow on top. And the other reason I never really explain why is that I think most of the time in life, when something bad happens, it's a constellation of circumstances that arise at the exact right moment in time for that thing to happen.
Right.
And there are a constellation of circumstances in Nora's circumstance, which I won't go into because of spoilers, but
Right.
yeah. So yeah, the mystery is there on purpose.
Yeah. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So we've kind of talked about the themes and the characters now. Tell me, which character was the hardest to write?
Oh, Nora, for sure. That was why I really ended up writing her with that omniscient narrator. And once I figured that out, she became very easy to write in a way. But starting out, she was definitely the hardest.
Right. Well, because she is a mystery.
Yeah. And
as a person, she's a mystery.
Yeah, she is a mystery. Nobody really understands what's going on in her head.
Right.
And I had the most fun writing Martine because I don't think we have enough older women as protagonists in modern literature. So that was another reason. I love Martine. So I had a lot of fun writing her.
I did too. And it was nice to see, as you said, an older woman with a career who raised children, who was in I'm trying to do the math in my head. I think she would have probably been a few years behind some of our most famous female jurists and judges like Sandra Day O'Connor and, of course, RBG and, some of those folks. I think she's a few years behind. She's probably a little bit older than Hillary Clinton, but more in that era, I think.
Yeah.
Coming through law school when there just weren't women. When I was in law school, the dean was a woman, and it was interesting because we had the dean was a woman, her husband was a professor, and her son was a professor. So we used to call them Mama, Papa, and Baby. We nicknamed them.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and Mama was the dean, and she had gone through law school in those days when it was just really difficult for women. Yeah. And she was really quite a role model, and she was a mentor to me, actually, because there were a couple of times I had to go in and rearrange my schedule, and she understood how hard it was to be, not just a woman, but a woman with a husband and kids and dogs and sick parents. And she was very helpful to make sure that I got through law school. If she hadn't been willing to rearrange my schedule, I wouldn't have gotten out. I would
Yeah.
have had to quit, you know. And those kind of women are very, very important. Women who understand, who've gone through that fight themselves to achieve a dream and are willing to help other women. And that's kind of the way I see Martine.
Yeah,
So,
I loved Martine. Yeah, she might be my favorite character. Although I ended up loving all my characters because I wrote them.
and so if Nora was the hardest to write, which one was the easiest? Or was there an easy one because they're all so complicated?
Um, I think they were all. I think they were all kind of equal. At certain points, I struggled a little bit with each one, trying to figure out different aspects of their personality. Um, and I was going to give an example, but that would do a spoiler, so I don't think I'll give an example there. But I sometimes I would write a particular character doing something and then go back and kind of throw those pages in the trash because it didn't feel true to that character. And I
Yeah.
think I did that, with each character at least once.
Wow. So how long in total did it take you to write this book from start to finish?
Honestly, I wrote this book very quickly. I think I start to finish was a little bit less than a year. But it was also COVID. And so, you couldn't see anybody or do anything. Um, and so I didn't have very many responsibilities in life.
Right. So it probably would have been longer if you'd been trying to juggle more things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there a character that well, you said you really like Martine. Is there a character that you had the most empathy for? Or were they all sort of the same on that too?
Um, Mm, I don't think so. There were two characters who I didn't really like very much, and for one of them that was purposeful. The prosecutor, Gil Stuckey,
Oh yeah.
and so I don't regret writing him that way. For some reason, I've just never really liked David, um, and I don't know why. I wrote him, I created him, but I just never. He was not my favorite character, so I suppose I have the least amount of empathy for him, but I don't know why.
Yeah,
I
I
know
could
that's
see that. I could see
nonsensical
that.
answer. Yeah.
Um, I found Angie really tore me in different directions because the mother aspect, of course, I have two kids, so you're trying to put yourself in her place, and you just like, how in the world are you going to handle this? But then there was some choices that she made that I just went, oh, honey, no. Like,
Yeah.
you just knew this is a bad idea. This is going to be trouble somewhere down the road. We won't go into details. But of course, we've all done that. So who am I to judge? Even a fictional character, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that they all do that. And Julian,
Oh,
who I
yeah.
think a lot of people have a soft spot for, he also did something. He made a very troublesome choice as well. I do think that Angie gets judged a little bit more harshly for her troublesome choice than Julian does for his. Maybe because his troublesome choice was further in the past. I'm not sure. Um, but I think they both made a pretty troublesome choice in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. They were both awful choices. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And when readers get to those points, they're going to go, oh, this is the one I bet. But again, we've all made bad choices.
Yes, we all have made bad choice. We all have that worst thing.
Right. But we're harder on women, I think, than we are on men. Men get a
I
pass sometimes.
I think that I actually do think that's the other reason that we tend to be harder on Angie than Julian, because I think we are harder on women than men, and I think
Yep.
women are harder on women than
Yep.
men.
Yep. I think you're right. And that I may have even fallen into that trap as a reader. I need to think about that a little bit.
Well, I think I don't know. Maybe it's just a part of our culture, or maybe we hold each other to a higher standard. I'm not sure. I
I think
don't know
it's
where it comes
mothering. I think we hold mothers to such high standards, and you're expected, like, we were laughing about you thought you're going to write a book when you had a kid. I mean, what you never had a baby before. You don't know until you do it how hard it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's not a movie. It's not like you pop the kid out and you go home and your jeans are zipped up again and that's not how it works. But you don't
Well,
know that till you get there, you know?
yeah, and I think we just we have this sort of angels on high attitude towards motherhood, and that motherhood is always supposed to be perfect. And the reality is it's rarely perfect. We as mothers make, or I'll just speak for myself. I, as a mother, made lots and lots of mistakes, and I was kind of learning as I went along. And, I thought after I had baby number one, I was like, oh, well, now I know what to do for baby number two. Well, baby number two was different than baby number one. So had to start all over again with that whole process. Maybe if we could take our 75-year-old brain at some point in the future and, put that brain in our 25-year-old selves, we would be great mothers. Who knows? But the reality is motherhood can be messy. You have laundry that you don't do when you're supposed to, or meals that don't come out very well, or cereal for dinner, or I don't know. Things happen, and that's
Right.
okay. One of my favorite Instagram accounts to follow is Jillian McAllister. She's so great because she really um, doesn't fall down the trap of only posting the perfect pictures. And she's all about showing how hard it can be to be a writer or a mother or a wife, or, how cakes don't always turn out how they're supposed to turn out. And I love that about her.
Yeah, I follow her too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have two final questions.
Yes.
I have to ask these. What are you working on? Are you going to be publishing another book with Celadon, or what's in the hopper that we can look for? Because obviously, whatever you write, I want to read.
Oh, yay. Thank you. I am working on another novel, and I really do like to write around issues and themes because it's a fun way to explore ideas that are interesting to me and that I myself am wrestling with. So the plot of this second novel is that a car is found abandoned with two children inside, and the mother is missing.
Mm.
And so the storyline is what happened to her, where is she? And the theme that I really want to explore is whether we are who we think we are, or whether we are who and what other people think we are in the world.
Fascinating. That sounds really interesting. When do you think we'll be able to get our hands on that? Do you know yet, or?
I would guess not for at least 18 months or more.
Okay.
Publishing is such a slow process. As soon as I know, I will publicize it on Instagram.
Okay, I'll be watching.
All right.
And then readers always want to hear about what writers are reading. So have you read any good books lately that you want to tempt us to put on our overflowing? I should. I guess you probably saw my stack over there when I turned the camera. It's really embarrassing. I shouldn't show you. Um, let's fill it up. Go for the
Well,
ceiling.
I recently, and I wasn't going to read this book, partially because sometimes I don't always read the books that are the most hyped up because I like to give other books a chance too,
Right.
and partially because I don't like epistolary novels. And an epistolary novel is one that's all written all through letters, through
Right.
correspondence. And so I read the correspondent,
Yeah.
and I read it basically in one sitting. I purchased it at like 6:30 on a Friday night, came home, read for a couple hours, went to bed, woke up, and finished reading it the next morning by 9.
Yeah.
I devoured that book, and so I learned something about myself, in that I shouldn't necessarily veer away from books that are written with correspondence as a main focus in them. But yeah,
Love
I
that book.
really, really enjoyed that.
I did too. I just loved it. My book club read it and we were just like, oh, it was so good. And now
Yeah.
they're going to make it into a movie.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah, Jane Fonda. I don't know how I feel about that.
Huh. Well, she can probably do anything. I just started watching Margot's